On this episode of the 520 Collective Show, we're not only figuring out how important local church membership is to the CHH community, but how the pandemic affected people's involvement in their local church. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's go.
Message heavy, dope rhyme show, they not ready. Race against the time like four wheels and Andretti. Keep it steady, beat it hard and they barely give them ears to hear the truth in the light. Dope confetti, message heavy, dope rhyme show, they not ready. Race against the time like four wheels and Andretti. Keep it steady, beat it hard and they barely give them ears to hear the truth in the light. Dope confetti, just the flip of the watch, it's game time. Flip of the watch, it's game time. Vibes, just the flip of the watch, it's game time. 520, flip of the watch, it's game time. Just the flip of the watch, it's game time. 20, flip of the watch, it's game time. 5 to the flip of the watch, it's game time. 520, flip of the watch, it's game time. 520.
520 Collective. Listen every day or get robbed. I'm kidding.
Yo, thank you for tuning in to this month's episode of the 520 Collective Show. We are being sponsored by Kingdom Club Apparel. Make sure you check out all the latest drops at GodFirstENT.com. That's God, the number one, STENT.com. You're going to find lots of great merch over there from Kingdom Club Apparel, including shirts, hoodies, caps, and lots more. So really cool stuff. Shout out to Kingdom Club Apparel for sponsoring this episode of the 520 Collective Show. Now let's go ahead and jump into this month's discussion. Let's go. Speaking of, I mentioned our Telegram channel earlier. Again, if you're a Telegram user and you want to subscribe to our Telegram, we get everything that we post on the website, it gets shared to Telegram so you can keep up on the latest. But when we do some exclusive conversations in there as well. And so one thing that we had posted in our Telegram channel not too long ago was a question of, hey, what are some topics as we are, moving into 2023 that you guys as the audience, what do you want to hear us talk about on the show? Shout out to our guy, Voss Cornerstone, the Vossier, the OG. Grow the heck up, man. He responded with a topic idea that I was like, that's really interesting. So I hit up KD. I was like, hey, what do you think of this? KD's like, yeah, let's talk about that. And so then we hit up Zero and said, hey, we don't care what you think, we're doing this. And Zero was like, okay, fine, fair enough.
I tried to stop him, but they wouldn't listen to me.
So no, he threw the idea of talking about membership in local churches, right? And a few different factors along with that. One of those being, how did the pandemic affect church membership? Talking about, comparing it to pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now that we are, I guess, officially out of the pandemic. I don't know what the current situation actually is here, or the current status of it. I think, am I wrong? I guess maybe the pandemic's supposed to officially be over by May. I guess there's like an expiration date on it now. Zero, do you know? I know you.
I think you're right. It was said that it was going to be implemented in May, even though we're out of it. But I don't know, man. It's like when your pastor says, I just got one more thing and I'm going to let you go. And then you sitting there for like another 15, 20 minutes.
That's the end of the free money. Like, we're not giving y'all out no more money out of it. So that is over in May.
Oh, man. Dang.
The muffin shop is closed.
I did not realize that that's what that meant. I'm going to have to cancel some orders. But no, so, now that we're, post-pandemic, I guess, how have things been looking when it comes to local church membership? And the second part of this that Voss threw at us was looking at this specifically when it comes to the Christian hip-hop community, right? Which I think is really interesting because I have not heard too many people discuss specifically membership in a local body when it comes to the Christian hip-hop world. I don't know. Have you guys heard that being talked about very often?
I hear it being spoken against, not being as important as it ought to be. There's a lot of talk about church being unnecessary. So I think that this is a great topic for us to dive into.
I don't think I really see too many people talking about the actual, being an active member of a local body. So when Voss threw this out, I was like, that's interesting. Let us, dive into that and let's see what we can find, man. So, when we set this up, we put out a survey, right, for Christian hip hop artists to jump in and answer a few questions. And I'm telling you, man, the data we got from it, I think is very interesting. I think some of it wasn't super surprising, but there was a few things on there that I was like, I did not expect it to come out that way. So I'm excited for us to jump into this and really take a look and see what kind of the results are. KD, you were talking about, I think we see more often people kind of maybe speaking out against, were you saying specifically church membership, or were you saying just being in the building, like being in a body in general?
I think unfortunately some of it has gotten all lumped in together. And so now we talk about things like not needing church. We talk about things like not needing a building. We talk about things like church hurt, obviously. And all of those things kind of get jumbled into the same conversation. The end result, though, by and large, from individuals who've grown up in church, people who have had unfortunately bad experiences with church, and, just kind of the random passerbys. Like, I hate to see Twitter status, Facebook posts to talk about and against Christians and talk about and against church from people who are supposed to be Christians and a part of the church. And the value that the church provides is not being trumpeted like it ought to be. And I think that's a problem.
While we're on the front end of this part of the conversation, I guess I should also throw out there that I follow a lot of older OG rappers, like people who's been in the game for 10 years or more. If I do follow artists, and a lot of these guys are actually like pastors or training to become pastors, or, they do talk about being in their local church. So maybe there's a generational aspect here that needs to be considered. I don't know if that reflects in the data or not.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I was going to say as well, I think that I'll be able to bring a little bit of a different view to this conversation is that, currently I myself am not a member of a local church, and I haven't been for a minute. But there's a lot of different things that go into that being the case for me. So I'll kind of unpack that a little bit as we go. I think it all kind of comes down to what are the circumstances. Is there something that maybe has some legitimacy to it that's keeping you out, or is it just you saying, nah, I just don't want to do it? Because that attitude and that heart position, I think, are big things whenever it comes to a topic like this, right? And what we see and what people get out of it. So yeah, man, we're going to just jump in to this here. I guess one thing I want to ask both of you, just give me your quick thoughts as we get ready to dive into the data and talk our way through this topic. What's something that you kind of hope to get out of this or hope to come across as we go through this topic?
I want us to understand the necessity of the church, especially in this season, with the different things that are going on and transpiring. We need to be reminded of the role that the church should be playing, which is a huge part of why we've fallen down on the job. But then two, I want individuals to be able to see not only the value the church provides, but the value that they can add to the church by being a part of the church. We're created to be connected.
Amen. Zero, what do you want to walk away with?
I'd like to see people be much more honest about where they are so that they can decide where they want to be and how they want to approach, regardless of what side of the conversation they're on. My wife recently said something about how we stopped hanging out with certain people because we didn't learn until after the pandemic what we actually believed. And that means there's a lot of people who weren't being honest with themselves. So a hard situation like that has a way of bringing it out into the open.
That's
I'm
good.
hoping that more people are willing to do that.
That's good.
All right. So guys, I think when we look at this topic, the place we got to start is we got to look at the church as a whole, right? I know Voss, he threw that idea out there to us of looking at how this has impacted Christian hip hop. I definitely want to do that, but I very much take the stance of Christian hip hop being a reflection of the church, the bigger overall church, right? Came across some very interesting data that was being tracked during this pandemic, right? And for people, if they want to go and check it out, there was actually an article released in January of this year. It was called More Americans Stay Away from Church as Pandemic Nears Year 3. This was from the American Enterprise Institute. And it was pretty cool because what they did was they'd actually been interviewing people and asking questions about church membership pre-pandemic, right? So when the pandemic hit, they kind of, I guess, shifted a little bit to account for that, but they were able to go back and follow up with some of these same people. And they actually talked to a little over 9,400 people on this poll. And
that's a good sample size.
Yeah. So, and same, and they were just asking them the same question. So it was, the first round of questions was in 2018 or between 2018 and early 2020 was when they were doing that initial polling. And then I believe it was during 21 and 22 when they were doing this second round of polling. So I'm going to throw some stuff out there and I want to hear your guys' thoughts about it, man. So I think the first thing that really jumped out to me, so again, we're talking about over 9,400 people. A third of those people that were surveyed said that they never attend worship services, which was up from 25% at the start of the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, about 25% of the people were saying that, hey, we never attend any kind of worship service. And once the pandemic hit, that jumped up to at least 33%, right? 1/3 of that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys make from that?
Well, I think part of that is just kind of the mindset in general, again, where, especially if you're someone who wants to be quote unquote religious, quote unquote spiritual, that being connected to a church doesn't have any bearings. It's not important. You can do it without that. And I think that's kind of a gross misinterpretation of what salvation, of what being a Christian, or even what being religious or spiritual is all about, or what it should be about.
What are you, or where's your mindset about, like, what makes you think that you're a Christian to begin with if you're not attending worship services at all? And I don't mean I don't mean to like throw that out there against people that are going through some sort of transition, or some, like, maybe you're trying to find a church, you just left a church, or like, I'm not talking about every, like, a hard line, just people who just as their baseline standard, they're just like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't need to go to church. To me, that is on par with like saying, I'm a Christian, but I've never been baptized. I'm a Christian, but I don't pray. They're like, we have these things that it's distinctly Christian. That's part of the religion. Like, I'm a Christian, but I don't practice my religion. Like that's kind of how I hear that. So I have to wonder, at the very minimum, how are you supplementing going to worship services? Because I know some people maybe go to home church, or they live stream, or they watch it on computer or TV or something. Like, how are you supplementing that if you're not attending worship services at all? That's the question that comes to mind.
And that's the thing that I thought was interesting. Like, I mean, I honestly feel like pre-pandemic, it was kind of harder in a way for people to go to church than it was once the pandemic hit, because everything was available virtually at that point, right? Like, people weren't going to buildings, so everything was streaming. You didn't have to get out of bed. And now, once the pandemic hit, more people were just skipping. But maybe that makes sense also. Katie, it looks like you got some thoughts on that.
No, because remember, I don't think we had an onslaught of virtual church until the pandemic got into full swing. So, yeah, we were doing online services, we were doing certain things, but the availability for people to just pull up and post up was there, and people had already started choosing the option to not to. It's not important. I don't need to be faithful. I don't need to be consistent, or I just don't need to go at all. So we see, there was already a number that was there. It's not like a number happened during the pandemic. The number increased as the pandemic has gone on. And so I think it's important to state that this isn't a brand new group of people. There's just more folks who've been added to that group. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So not like hey, we never existed. We were always going to church. And then now all of a sudden, once the pandemic hit, the pandemic is the reason why we decided to never, ever go to another service. And now this was a greater reason, quote, / excuse to become a bigger group. Let's blame it on COVID.
Yeah.
And that's where I was looking at, was the group that wasn't going already. Like, as a baseline, how are they supplementing service?
And the other thing you said a minute ago, Zero, that I think plays into this as well, because you were talking about, how can you consider yourself a Christian, right? But not do XYZ, not do all these different things that reflect that, right? And I can't remember if it was in this article or if it was in a different article I was reading as I was, doing the research on this topic. But I did read that for the first time, I don't want to say ever, but I can't remember in how long exactly. But this is like the first time in a very long time that when you look at the overall majority of Americans, right, that the percentage of Americans who consider themselves Christian whenever it comes to religion dipped below 50%. Like we are currently at below 50%, right? So when people are talking about, and I know this is a different subject altogether, but when people talk about, hey, America is no longer necessarily a Christian nation, they're actually not really wrong, right? Because it's below that. I can't remember what I want to say. It was still like in the upper 40s, so it's just a little bit below. But I mean, that plays into it, and we're not talking. But even with that, we're not talking about people who are active, devoted Christians. We're just talking about people who, like these people, right? Where like, oh well, my parents were Christian, so I guess I'm Christian, or whatever the case.
That's exactly what I mean. Like, I don't know anybody who actually believes like my parents were Christian, so I guess I'm a Christian. But I do know people who, like, they say I'm into rock music or I'm into EDM, but they don't know any DJs. Like they say they're Christian, but don't practice the religion. Like, what is actually going through their mind in the case? Like, I like that. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a movie you like, but you have the DVD, but you never watch it.
Well, there's a ton of quote unquote non-practicing individuals and a bunch of different beliefs, and some individuals understand that they don't practice, that they're not active, that they're not, like Eric mentioned, devout, and so they have an idea, like, and not to kind of cause individuals to stand out or stick out, but you'll find this. I've found it most often within Catholicism, where individuals will say, I'm not a good Catholic. I'm non-practicing. I don't go to service. I don't do the sacraments. I don't pray the rosary. I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, they'll be quick to acknowledge, like, yo, this is who I believe, but my life is not a reflection of it. And I think that part may answer some of your question. Like, individuals are comfortable with having that association, but not necessarily identifying in terms of my life speaks this language. So I've got evidence, I've got fruit that backs up my claim.
And here's what's interesting to me. So that was, the numbers for people who never attend. So then on the flip side of that, right, Americans who attend regularly or occasionally, in 2020, that percentage was 36%, right? So a little over a third. But now it's currently at 32%, so just under a third. Although, so we have a third of people who never attend. We have just right under a third who, it says regularly or occasionally. I wonder what like that under third are doing. Maybe they're the ones who show up for like Easter. I don't know.
Well, no. So they might fall.
What is the third option?
The third option has got to be the people who are actually, doing. I mean, unless I'm reading this wrong. So you've got a third who don't go at all. You got a third who are casual.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, because I look at the group that either casual or don't go, and another thing that came to mind is the people who have to work on Sunday, or they have to work when they would normally go to church, and they just try to get it in when the schedule allows them to. Maybe that adds to that number, but
one of those
casually, I hadn't thought about.
Well, I think when you're talking about regular and casual, my guess is, just looking at some of the other information on here, it's probably like considering occasional, I don't know, maybe the ones who, if they do go, it's going to be on Sunday morning, you know. But the regular attenders, they're there on Sundays, they're there Wednesday nights, that kind of stuff. Because it did say that infrequent attendees were the largest of all groups. And I guess with them describing it that way, the infrequent attendees would be the ones that I would think of where they're just going to show up if there's like maybe little cousin Johnny's getting baptized, so we're all going or whatever, right?
No, I see infrequent as the ones that also have like to work, and they would go if they could, but there's stuff in their life that is keeping them from it, and they're not doing anything to change that.
So you don't see that as like the people that show up for holidays?
I don't count them.
That's a little different. The CMEs are a little different. I would. It's tough though not to lump both of those people into the same group though. You know what I mean? Like one is a choice, and then the other one is a choice. They're both choices, right? By default, that leads to infrequency. It's hard to not lump both of them into that group. The person that works on Sunday because they think they have to work on Sunday, and the person who says Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, we're going to turn up for the Lord. I'm going to wear my favorite suit. And then the rest of the year, especially during football season, I'm not, don't bother me at all.
So some really interesting data that they got out of this poll was they broke it down into like certain groups of people, right? So speaking of the people who are likely to skip a service, right? If you guys had to take just a wild guess, what would be a group that you think would be most likely to skip those services? Zero, what do you think? I know you got an idea. Don't be reading the notes though.
I don't know. Is there a word for like Medea kind of Baptist?
So here are the top 3 groups that are most likely to skip services, okay? Liberals came in at 46%, people who are never married, 44%, and individuals under 30 are at 43% of most likely to skip services. So they're the ones that you probably, maybe you put a little pressure on them. They're gonna show up.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
You know what?
Because you're looking at values, and a lot of the traditional values are built around institutions like going to church, culturally speaking.
Well, there's another thing that stands out to me when you look at those groups. We're talking about individuals who have to feel as though there's a need for God. There's a need for Jesus. There's something that's going on that prompts them. So you're talking about liberals. I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want structure. I don't want people telling me what to do, what I can't do, what to love, when to love it, who I can love, who I can't love. I don't want any of that. Never been married. So when we talk about the institution of marriage, man, woman, Jesus, church, there's that whole relationship thing there. So I've never been married, so I don't understand the level of commitment or intimacy that might be required. And then individuals under 30. So we're talking about the millennials and folks who can logically take care of whatever's going on in their lives. I don't need spiritual guidance. I don't need God. I am God in some instances. So a lot of that grouping makes sense to me.
And also like the never married under 30, these are likely people who don't have kids as well. And so that light hasn't come on because there's something that happens when you have kids. You start thinking about the world way differently. And that there's a lot of crossover between that group and the liberals.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of it actually very much reflects that as well, right? So the groups that saw the least amount drop off, conservatives at 20%, over 65 at 23%, and married at 28%.
I would imagine that a lot of that group, that's the occasionals that we were talking about, they say they're Christian, but they don't go to church very much. I would imagine a very large percentage of that is going to be young conservatives. Where like they grew up and maybe they'll get back to that, but right now they're working or doing college or whatever it is.
I think the biggest concern, once kind of looking at the overall data, the biggest concern really is just the health and life of the local bodies in general, right? Because these local bodies got hit hard with this pandemic. Prior to or going back to the year 2000, the average congregation size in America was about 137 members. Now, as of 2020, that number's down to 65. So, I mean, you're talking about cutting in half.
50%.
Yeah. And they had a really, really good quote in here about this and how we should view it and how we should be proactive in attacking this issue. It said the focus should be how can we become a better church rather than how do we create what we used to have. So we're not going to be able to do what we were doing before the pandemic, right? Doing what we were doing during the pandemic isn't necessarily an option to keep going because we've seen the results of that. But we have to come back and we need to figure out the goal shouldn't be, well, let's get back to where we were. And people's minds and views have changed on that. We got to figure out how do we get better.
Yeah, agree. We can't just do what we were doing prior to the pandemic. That was a different season. Times have changed. So you need to take that and you need to seek God on direction and how to shift and how to maneuver for the different space that people are in. It doesn't matter, if you're a ministry that's in truth or not. You have to know how to pivot to get to where you're trying to go in this hour.
I agree, man. It's interesting. So we're going to see what, exactly happens coming out here. But our next thing is to take this data and let's start looking at it from the lens of Christian hip hop. And we'll be doing that next. Hey guys, I want to say thank you for listening to the 520 Collective podcast. Make sure to check out FiveTwentyCollective.com. It is the home for indie news and faith-based hip-hop. Follow us on social media, including Twitter and Instagram at 520_co. Also, to get exclusive content, hit up our AudioMac account where you'll find extended interviews, playlists, and more.
Lots of good stuff out for February 2023. Here are just a few Wavemaker picks for you to check out. Shalom, the new project with lyrics by FLF and production by Imagery on Wax. Keep It a Bean, a new single by Bill B, who just doesn't seem to miss recently. Scribe and the Wildings by Scribe Music is an early contender for EP of the year. Heavy Gunner is a collab single by CHH legend Sivion and producer extraordinaire Malix, the lead single off their upcoming album, in fact, which you can read all about on 520collective.com, and that's one that I've personally had on constant repeat. And then finally, Sunrise is the new single by Jeremiah Blygen featuring Mouthpiece, and it's the latest in a series of incredible Jeremiah Blygen releases. You seriously don't want to miss this one. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any indie Christian hip-hop that's worth hearing, there are a few ways that you can do that. Check out the hashtag 520co playlist on Spotify or AudioMac. Listen to the Dino Nuggets Music Discovery Radio Show on Mixcloud. Subscribe to our Substack by clicking the Join Our Substack newsletter button on our website to get weekly drops directly to your email inbox, or just go to www.520collective.com for direct access to the best indie releases in our space. I've been Darius Mullen. You can connect with me on Twitter at I am Darius Mullen to tell me what you think I missed this month. Peace.
Artist, what is the key to getting your music to your target listener? Making sure that your catalog is available where people are listening. Trackstars is helping independent artists do just that with Nectar Distro. Sign up for Nectar today to have your music delivered for you to all the major digital streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, SoundCloud, YouTube, and much, much more. Go to 520collective.com/nectar, that's NECTAR now, to sign up and keep 100% of your royalties along with all of your music rights. With monthly payouts, comprehensive reports, specialty tools like the Single Maximizer and account management services, along with a dedicated team that understands your needs as an artist, it really is hard to beat what Nectar Distro and Trackstars bring to the table. So hit up 520collective.com/nectar to get started now. Alright, so obviously, those were the overall impact for the church whenever it comes to the pandemic, but Christian hip hop, man, it's a reflection of the church as a whole, but it still has its own unique approach, its own unique experiences as well, right? Because no longer are we just having the idea of, okay, this is Christian culture. It's trying to blend and coexist in a way with hip hop culture as well, which yeah, I think we could keep hitting on these ideas that could be great topics for future shows as well, because I know that that balance of Christian culture and hip hop culture, and can they coexist at all, is a conversation I've heard, multiple times, which I think would be good for us to talk about. But in this case, you do have these two different cultures pulling at people that are in this crazy thing that we know as CHH, right? Christian hip hop, faith-based hip hop, whatever the case may be. So I don't know, Katie, you shared your thoughts about what you kind of were anticipating, right, for the church as a whole in the last segment. What are you thinking about whenever you think of Christian hip hop in particular as more a part of the body rather than the whole body, and how you see something like a pandemic impacting that sphere, that space? I hate saying that word space, but I don't got a better option.
It is what it is.
Oh, absolutely.
That's an inside joke, guys. I'm sorry. So I've always said that anything that is an extension of the body deals with things that the body deals with, right? So CHH is a branch. It's an appendage, technically. And we can get into that whole dynamic. That's definitely another conversation for another show. But when we talk about, churches having to disband, even if it's for a while, or no longer being able to meet in person out of concern, not out of ignorance, not out of recklessness or endangering of members, but not being able to gather and get together because, we don't want to cause each other to be sick, not forsaking God's power and his sovereignty, but making sure that we're exercising godly wisdom. Anytime you're used to being around other people and then all of a sudden you can't be around those people, there's an impact. There's a difference. Anytime you can be in person and experience God corporately, and then now all of a sudden you can't do that, and we're trying our best to recreate what we can via Zoom or whatever other vehicle of online gathering, there's a difference. And so if I'm not, Zero used that term supplementing early on, even for individuals who were faithful members, needed to still be able to do things that would help supplement that consistent time that they were spending corporately. How much more so for individuals? And again, I know we've had this conversation before because there's so many individuals within that CHH genre, sphere, space, what have you, who don't, pledge allegiance to the body of Christ to the degree of, I go to church, I'm sitting under a pastor, I'm sitting under leadership, I'm submitted to leadership. And when I go out, I'm going out under recovering. I've been sent forth and I'm allowed to do that. There's so many people who don't experience that. So how, and we hear it in the content, because there's a lot of questionable doctrine that's in the music. We see it in the actions and in the interactions online and on Twitter, where you're ready to cuss somebody out, but you're supposed to be a Christian artist, and you guys kind of get into the whole deal with whoever's online. So there's definite impact from the lack of connection, and you see its footprint kind of sprinkled all throughout the space. And it's unfortunate to see, but you can definitely tie it in.
I think it's also important to point out the perspective of the artist being it's something of a career choice, or it's I don't know the phrase I'm looking for, but it's not just like how you go to church because you're a saint. It's like a position. It's like the worship leader, usher, deacon, I guess the rapper. Now you're in the choir, or like what is your position in the church? Versus, are you just a rapper who goes to a church? There's the distinction that needs to be made there, because like KD alluded to, having a covering, and that assumes that your church is on board with what you do. Maybe they give you some guidance. There's some acceptance there. So that's definitely affect how you would react to a situation like this, because a lot of rappers don't even make their living doing that. So I think that there's some distinction that we should keep in mind there.
One thing that I started thinking about is, like, okay, if we take those bigger numbers and we take the Christian hip hop world and we look at especially those groups, right, where it broke down, the groups that were more likely to, skip a service. And compared to being there on a regular basis. Like, where did those circles start intersecting, and where does the majority of Christian hip hop, find themselves whenever it comes to those different categories, right? Because I think if we kind of knew that, and I feel like there's probably a lot of maybe assumption to it. So here's what we did though, because we wanted to see, okay, we got this bigger data that was done for us, right? But obviously they didn't have a Christian hip hop group, for us to know. So we were like, okay, how are we going to figure out, or at least get a sampling of what we think reflects, Christian hip hop?
That's really lame. They got the Church of the Latter-day Saints and Jews in there, but they don't have Christian rappers.
Have CHH.
Come on, man. Who is they though?
Well, the whoever it was that did the poll, but what we did was we put out a survey, right? We did that through our social media account, through our newsletter, a few different ways that we put it out. We had, a good amount of responses to that. And here's what I want to do. I want to read some of the questions that we asked on there and give you guys the results of it. Now, these were really some simple, just yes, no questions, but I want to get your reaction to see what you think about these results, right? So the first question we asked was, prior to the pandemic, were you an active member of a local church? And dude, this number was actually pretty high. It came in at 91.7% said yes, they were. 8.3% saying no, they weren't. Zero. What do you feel about that?
I'm not super surprised by that. I mean, I'm actually relieved to see the number is as high as it is.
Now, here's where, it's definitely a reflection of what we're seeing in the church as a whole, right? During the pandemic, though, the amount of people that were active members in church when it comes to CHH, 75%. So that dropped down from 91, 92% to 75%. So a quarter of people within CHH were no longer an active member of a local church community during the pandemic, or at least the height of the pandemic, I guess. So this would be, I would say probably before, churches really started opening back up, when most were virtual. Now, I mean, obviously, I know that kind of depends on where in the country you were, right? Because in the Midwest, the buckle of the Bible Belt where I'm at, a lot of churches stayed open. Now, they offered the virtual option, but a lot of them did still remain open and allow people to come to it, or two services, right? So, but still, we had almost a 20% shift in this. KD, surprised in any way?
Not necessarily. When you think about kind of boots on the ground, how many churches actually shut down because of COVID and blamed COVID for us closing the doors. So we're not going to serve God because there's a pestilence outside and we don't really believe what we've been preaching to y'all all these years. We've been taking, never mind. So again, no, not completely surprised.
Well, and I think this is maybe where it's a little telling, right? So the third question that we asked is, hey, now that we're kind of coming out of this thing, are you currently back to being an active member, or currently still an active member in a local church? And that number has increased. It hasn't got back up to where it was, though. It's kind of split the difference. So, about 83% said yes, compared to 17% saying no, that they are not currently an active member. So I don't know. I think that shows maybe, or it reflects the people who really did, kind of step away out of genuine concern and wanting to protect maybe themselves or their family or whatever the case may be, compared to maybe some of us who weren't really all about it, like what KD was saying earlier, where, hey, we're here because maybe this is what's expected. Oh, now we've got a legitimate reason in the eyes of a lot of people, right, to stay away. And so that's good enough for me, because we've seen about half of the people coming back, according to the data, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in that 16% that never came back, they're going to be, to draw from the parable, the seed that landed on the ground that was shallow and the seed that landed in the thorns and the thistle. Is like a combination of two. These were people who maybe were new or weak Christians. They weren't being fed. They kind of fell through the cracks, unfortunately. And I feel like that's where the church failed a lot of people. But then you also had people who were so concerned with the concerns of this world and the worries of this life that they just never went back to church. I would put that on them. The onus is on them. So it's a combination of between that fallen lost 16%. It's a combination of the people and the failure of the church.
Well, let me tap this on that because early on, you were talking about individuals not doing so. Situations and circumstances kind of really bring to the forefront where you actually are and where you're not. And so when we look at situations, you mentioned just now, about individuals who were weak or, maybe baby Christians, people who aren't getting fed, weren't in ministries that were giving them what they need. Things expose where your heart really is, right? And so a lot of that happened during this time frame. Additionally, you don't realize is how easy it is for your flesh to have a revival. You stop getting out of those things that help you grow, that help you kill your flesh, that help you seek God and give you a desire. And then all of a sudden you can't do those things with frequency. It's like, man, you don't know what you had until it's gone, until you can't choose to throw it away or disrespect it or disregard it anymore. Now it's taken from you and you don't know how to respond to it. And so I think a lot of that happened with individuals at church. And one Sunday you stay home and the next Sunday you stay home and you start getting comfortable. And then the Sunday after that, it becomes more and more comfortable. And so you kind of morph back into a pre-Christ routine that ultimately ends up becoming counterproductive. So now when you can go back to church, now you don't have the power to choose to go back to church. And that's, I think, really understated as a part of what's happening and what's going on now.
I know I've kind of hinted at my situation. I'm going to be just transparent with it. We've went to multiple different churches in our area, and it's just been a struggle to find a place where it feels like this is the right place for us. This is where we need to be. Right, wrong, whatever. I'm not trying to make an excuse for this, but due to that and just due to what we've come across and a desire and a feeling of not being, really tied to where we currently are, where we think, hey, at some point we're going to live somewhere else. We've kind of just been like, okay, this is the season that we're in right now, right? Now that doesn't mean, I think for me, that I haven't forsaken the body. I think that's a big thing for me is, not to forsake that fellowship, right? Where I come together with the team here at FiveTwenty and talk. I've got a group that we are consistently doing Bible studies on a daily basis, and we talk about it, and we're in the Word and we're reading. And honestly, since starting that, I've read the Word nearly every day, for quite a while now. A lot more than I was prior. So I think there's a level of accountability. And then, looking for ways to kind of get plugged in as well, right? I mean, there's some different stuff, whether it's through some Christian organizations that exist at the school I work for or whatever, those conversations are happening and that growth is there and that challenge is in place. Is it ideal? Maybe not, right? Maybe not. But just for full transparency, because I told you guys I was going to let you know where I'm at. And this is why I can relate with the comment that was made as well. It's like, okay, there may be a way that we expect it to look. I think there are times where maybe it doesn't look that traditional way, but God is still working through it.
There's got to be consistency with that. But let me say this, and because I understand your situation and I understand other situations like it, not that particular situation isn't isolated. But what I will say is this. Romans talks about faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. That's one. Then Romans also goes on to say that how shall they hear without a preacher? It is important. That's an important dynamic. It's an important part of our growth and our maturity in Christ Jesus. We have that aspect. It's something that we don't want to put off. And so again, I understand the dynamics and the intricacies that may be involved with any individual situation. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that church is important because of all of the different things that come. Now, if you gather at a home church, and when I say home, I mean like a house, like in somebody's living room, because tons of churches have started there in living rooms and meeting halls, and not necessarily in an actual church building. Guess what? You're not doing Hebrews 10 and 24 and 25. You're not forsaking the assembling of the brethren. Why? Because you're getting together where saints are. And where saints are, God is, right? 2 or 3 gather together in my name, there I am in the midst, says Jesus Christ. So that part is important. So if that's what church looks like for you, that's great. Make it to that. But then if you found a place, found a ministry, you found a home church where you can go and plant and be a part of that corporate body, go there and be there and serve there. I think a lot of times what we don't do though, is that we're not pursuant enough of looking. Like we'll go out and we'll shop for a house, we'll shop for a used car, right? And we'll keep going to the lots until we find the one that's for us, the one that we like. We won't do the same thing a lot of times about church. And God expects that same level of effort to find a place that will help to provide security for our souls. And so we have to have kind of like a similar pursuit when it comes to that as well.
So here's the thing about when we're looking at those initial questions on the survey, right? I felt like it was very much like the experiences of the individuals, which is fine, which is cool. But I got to thinking, like, okay, as I was putting the survey together, like, okay, how do we take these individual experiences and figure out how they relate to the bigger picture when it comes to Christian hip hop, right? So I added in a few more questions at the end where I wanted people to take their experiences and say, okay, based on what I'm seeing, what do we think CHH is doing? Where are we at? And where do we need to be going forward, right? So again, I'm going to throw these out there. These first few were just yes or no questions, and let you guys, just respond to them, right? The first question being, do you believe that there's biblical fellowship within CHH? So fellowship, right? And the results there was about 2/3, so 66.7%, saying yes, there is biblical fellowship, with a 1/3, 33% saying no.
I would fall on the side of no, only because in my experience, it's been mostly satellite work. I record a verse, I send it to you, and then it gets worked, studio, a lot of satellite stuff. So yeah, in my experience, it isn't like that. I think there's room where fellowship can happen, but it's going to look different than what we were probably expecting.
I like that. I didn't look at it from that standpoint, but I think it does kind of tie into my response. But I like that you brought that part up. I'm going to say no, because the people that I've met doing this, I build relationships with that have nothing to do with the music. You know what I'm saying? Like we've done life with each other. I may have met you at an event, but the reason that we fellowship doesn't have anything to do with music, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like literally have gone through like ups and downs with individuals in this space. Like we know each other, spouses, kids, you know what I'm saying? Like that type of situation. We may have met under that basis, but our fellowship isn't based on that. And I don't think that we mandate, to Zero's point, enough. We're saying, man, because we've got that whole works for hire mentality. People are charging for verses and want to do features and all this other stuff. Like, we just rather get that than build a relationship with the person that we want to work with. I think that's a recipe for disaster, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I think whenever you're looking at it strictly from the idea of artists working together, like what Zero was alluding to, right? I totally get that. I totally get that viewpoint on it, because yes, it is, no one's in the studio together anymore, right? It's all, I'm going to record it over here, I'm going to send you the file, blah, 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 send it back. However, whenever I look at these responses, whenever we're talking about, is there fellowship that you would expect to see from CHH? I look at, I know that I'm a part of several different, like, text chats, group chats, Telegram, etc. And there is a lot of conversation happening with, groups of individuals. Some of those groups have some of the same members in it. So I see those conversations happening, right? I mean, like, even for example, the FiveTwenty team, none of us are in the same place. We don't see each other face to face, but we do talk on a regular basis in our Telegram chat. Does that kind of change your guys' outlook on that? Do you think there's more, even though it's maybe not centered around fellowship that is happening during the creation process, but it's more behind the scenes fellowship taking place?
I don't think you can discount those types of things as fellowship. I don't think you can. I think it would be negligent to do that, because we have these vehicles that we have to use for the right reason, right? Just like social media or anything else, it's there, but we need to make sure that we use it correctly. So
I guess it kind of comes down to how people sort of view fellowship, honestly, because, to me, when I think like the fellowship of saints, I think just that interaction and that being involved in life. The second question here was actually about, do we believe that there's biblical accountability in CHH, right? Which I think factors into more of to what you guys were kind of getting at there, especially when you're talking about mentorship and discipleship and all this stuff, right? Accountability is a part of those things. And I do say, like, the people who responded to the survey, I feel like they were being pretty honest here, because I don't think it's a coincidence at all. Those numbers were kind of flipped from the first question, right? Only 33% said yes, there is accountability in CHH, where 67% said no. So much larger, but completely opposite. So maybe that does take into account how people view fellowship in general, right? If you're viewing fellowship as, hey, we're hanging out, we're getting to know each other, whatever, even if we're not in the same room, we're talking in the group text on a regular basis. Now, accountability is a different topic.
I think a large reason why a lot of individuals don't go to church, choose not to go to church, have stopped going to church, is because they don't want the accountability. They don't want you in their space, in their business. And what we fail to realize is that we complain about not having any real friends is because we don't allow people in those spaces in our lives. And we've done that intentionally, whether we understand it and realize it or not. We've decided that we don't want any other voice in our situation or circumstances but our own. We've even done that to God. And so if I'm going to do that to God, how much more so am I not going to do it to his people?
So let me throw this question at you guys. I'm going to put you on the spot and get your instant thoughts here. This was actually the last question that we asked on the survey. There was another one. I think the results of it, we can come back to it if we want to, but I think the results of it, I feel like maybe it was a poor question in general. But the last question that we asked was, how do you think CHH can improve and grow as a part of Christian culture and the body? What are your guys' thoughts?
Twerk teams.
Perfect.
No?
Seems like a very holy option.
Okay, no. I saw an opportunity, I had to take it.
Go for it. Absolutely.
Dude, it was amazing.
No,
that was an amazing answer.
CHH can grow as part of the church culture. We have to get back to the business of absorbing church culture so that we can reflect it. Foremost thing that you can be doing is absorbing that church culture so that you can reflect it to the world. And then we can enjoy that confrontation that comes with saying, our team is better than that team. Christ is better than the world. The Bible's way of doing this is wiser than the world's way of doing this. We can't even make that comparison because we're so busy trying to synthesize the two. That's where we have to make some adjustments.
Man, I have to echo and champion a lot of what my counterpart just said there. I would say, honestly, get rid of the HH and focus on the C. But again, that's another conversation. But literally, we got to get back to the basics and keeping the main thing the main thing. And I think it's vitally important that we get back to esteeming Christ in our hearts. And not allowing outside voices and influences. We forget that we're supposed to be leading the charge. We're not supposed to be cutting the cookies. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're supposed to be leading and being trendsetters and trailblazers and forerunners. We're not supposed to be following trends, and we're supposed to be creating them. That we're kingdom creatives. Creatives technically should exist in the kingdom because we serve the creator. We're direct offspring now because of what Jesus did for us. But too often allow ourselves to stimulate to what we're in, but not supposed to be of. And we do ourselves a disservice. And now we can't tell people come to Jesus when they're like, well, you and Jesus and you look just like me. You live just like me. You act just like me. What's the difference? And you saying, oh man, that's deep. Well, no, if this is what we're doing and if this is what we're calling our ministry or our music, then the focal point needs to be Christ. I don't understand how we can't understand that. And so if we're going to be a service in the earth to the church and to the world, Christ has to be our priority. Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, draw all men unto me.
So I find that very interesting, Katie, because as I'm looking at some of the responses we got to that question, the first one that I pulled out actually said by the way that we grow as part of Christian culture in the body when it comes to CHH is by accepting that parts of it are ministry and other parts are business instead of trying to make it all ministry, identify which is which and do it better.
I would want to attack that statement. I'm hoping that there's some things that I'm missing about that, but we don't want to call something ministry because then there's responsibility that lies along with that. It's one of the same reasons why a lot of artists who are known because of this space didn't want to have the name of Christ on them, because I want to do other things. I want to be irresponsible, and I don't want to have the weight or the responsibility of being a Christian, whatever it is, follow me into what it is that I want to do. I'm here because of Christ, but now I want to pivot and kind of do my own thing. You guys leave me alone. I don't want other Christians in my comment sections saying certain things and quoting scripture. How dare you quote scripture to me, Christian? But wait, G, you're supposed to be a Christian too. Like, we're supposed to, if we can't agree on anything else, we're supposed to be able to agree on the word, right? But even we get that part wrong. We've got to get back to doing that. So I hope that there's something I'm missing about that statement. But even with that being said, there's a way that God in his word gives us to conduct business. So what are you saying? That because it is business, I can't be godly in doing it? I can't put Christ first in my example, in my exhibiting it, in my execution? I don't understand what I'm saying. And if I'm reacting or responding to that too harshly, please say something. But it's like, no excuses. Part of this ministry, only part of this is ministry. The other part is business. We need to figure out which is which and act or respond accordingly. That sounds like a bit of a cop-out.
Well, I think one final statement that we got that we can all agree on is that we just need to be more understanding. We need to have more open and honest conversations and support and pray for each other. I agree with that. I hope you guys agree with it. I'm really interested to know what people listening think. So we want to hear your voice. Make sure you go to FiveTwentyCollective.com. Hit us up on Twitter at FiveTwenty_co. Give us your thoughts, man. How has not only the pandemic impacted your personal interaction when it comes to the local body, but what are you seeing within CHH as a result of some of this stuff, and how would you like to see us getting better moving forward? So yeah, make sure you hit us up, let us know. So fellas, it's been good, but it's time to get out of here. We'll be back with you for the next one. Let's go.